Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer. I know I may look a little different. I did a video explaining what happened to my beard. Short version, had to shave it for a show. It's growing back, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I am here to talk about the Orville, the new Seth MacFarlane series that is trying to be like Star Trek. But let's not get ahead of ourselves as far as how well it's doing. It's only 3 episodes in, but this latest episode, which is the 3rd episode that I've just seen, okay, I was gonna give the Orville a shot. I mean it. I wanted to give this show a fair shot. Even though I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Seth MacFarlane as a comedian, and even though I'm always skeptical about how Fox is going to treat its sci-fi shows ever since you know what happened, I wanted to give it a shot. Because you never know. I mean, it could have been good. And let me just start by saying this. The advertisements are very deceiving. If you haven't seen anything regarding the Orville yet, the ads are very, very deceiving about just what kind of show it is. Based on the commercials and all, you would think this was a comedy from start to finish, like zany, typical Seth MacFarlane kind of irreverent humor. It's not. Here is the joke of the Orville, the primary joke of the Orville. It is 95% of the time indistinguishable from Star Trek, but every now and then someone makes a penis joke, or they reference marijuana, or something like that. Pop culture, something like that, that's what it is. And I mean it too when I say indistinguishable from Star Trek, because it really is. And credit where credit is due, that is impressive. If you were to show me a clip from this show completely out of context, like obviously in the days before anyone would have seen this footage from this, if you were to have shown someone, even me, footage from this show and told them this is from a new Star Trek series, an official Star Trek series, I might have believed you, because it really does feel like Star Trek all the way through. From the visual aesthetic, to the music, to the makeup, to the character archetypes that comprise the main cast, to even just the rhythm of the episode, how it's filmed and how the scenes progress. Indistinguishable from your average Star Trek episode. Maybe not from the original series, but Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, looks and feels exactly the same. And that is impressive that they've actually managed to do that. It shows that they've really been paying attention. They're really committed to capturing that feeling. But again, that's 95% of the time it's like that. And then someone says, bite me, or drops a random curse word that you're kind of surprised they're getting away with saying on television these days if you're above a certain age range, or something like that. A joke will come along every so often that is very un-Star Trek. And as a result, it kind of stands opposed to it. So it doesn't really work, if you ask me. I mean, comedy is subjective, I get that, but Star Trek did have a sense of humor. Well, it's still running. It does have a sense of humor, even with the reboot movies, whether you love them or hate them, or any of the series, any of the movies, animated series, books, comics, what have you. Star Trek knew how to have a laugh, but it was a very specific kind of humor that meshed well with everything else. There's not really a particular style, because the subjects could vary. Sometimes it was a little bit raunchy. I mean, not overtly, but it could be. and sometimes it was referencing something pop culture related, but it always felt natural. Here it doesn't. But that's not really what I want to talk about, because I could have maybe gotten used to that. Or maybe the show might improve from here on out, but the third episode... The third episode is what has convinced me that the Orville is, at the very least, not my show. And at the very worst, a bad show. So, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what happens in it. Whether you've seen it or not, I don't care. I'm spoiling what happens. Okay, so there's this race in the series. I guess they're kind of the Klingon-Vulcan mashup. It doesn't really matter what they're supposed to be in reference to Star Trek. They're an alien race, and they are specifically defined by the fact that it's a one-gender race. All of the aliens are male. They are somehow able to reproduce by laying eggs. They're aliens, so whatever. But still, one-gender race. And they're all dudes. And there are two of these aliens who are partners aboard the Orville. Only one of them is an officer. The other's the civilian who's just living there. They recently, like in the second episode, they had a child. The officer laid an egg, the officer alien, and the egg hatched at the end, and shock of all shocks, it's female. And we learn in the third episode what the result of that is. So, it turns out this alien race, occasionally females are naturally born, but surgery is done to automatically convert them to male. That's just what their culture does. So, the officer goes to the ship's doctor requesting this surgery, and the doctor says no. They're not going to do that sort of thing because it's unethical and takes away the infant's right to choose when it is old enough to choose. And the captain's in support of this idea that the surgery would be unethical. And eventually, the officer alien comes around to that way of thinking, but his partner refuses, still thinking that the surgery of turning the baby from female to male is the proper thing to do. So a tribunal is called, basically a court case. And again, classic Star Trek here, right? Some of the most famous episodes of the entire series from each individual installment has been styled as a court case, or there have been court cases as part of the movies sometimes. I mean, it's classic. So, and what better way to debate a touchy subject, such as this is clearly looking to be, than in a court case, right? So, they go through this whole thing, and once it begins, it starts to get a little confusing, because for most of the episodes, it's like, okay, so this is clearly about the transgender issue. So it's trying to invert it, though, because in this case, transgender isn't opposed by the society per se, but it's being imposed on people. So it takes away the right to choose, which is also a big part of the transgender thing. So, you don't quite know what it's going for at first, but it's an interesting inversion at least. You're curious to see what they're going to say, given what has happened. Then the court case begins, and suddenly it becomes about female empowerment, and about how there's nothing wrong with being a woman, and women can do what men can do, and sometimes do it better. And it feels like it gets a little off topic in that regard. Like, okay, now we're just arguing about women's role in society. So maybe this isn't about transgenderism. Okay, maybe. We'll see what happens. So, some of the crew goes, finds a female member of this species living on the planet in secret, bring her to court to testify, and the twist winds up being that not only is this female who has remained hidden for so long, not only is she there, was she never given that reassignment surgery, she is also one of the planet's greatest philosophical writers. And you're thinking, okay, that's going to be the thing that changes everything. That will somehow affirm the feminism and the transgenderism somehow, maybe, well, something will happen. That will be the tipping point, right? Wrong. The tribunal decides there's not sufficient evidence to say that the surgery shouldn't happen. The baby gets the gender reassignment surgery, and then at the very end, the one alien officer who thought the baby should have the right to choose gives the new baby a little doll of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, because the thing that convinced him was watching Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and how the red nose worked, and so he gives him that because maybe he'll choose in the future. It's symbolic, so he might choose to go back to being a female, so he'll be doubly trans, or... See, this is the issue. I have no clue what this episode was trying to say. It was clearly trying to say something. But what? I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not even sure the episode knows. Like I said, it starts off being about, or seeming to be about, the transgender issue and about accepting gender identity, but also not, because the society imposes gender identity on you. But if there's the potential for the baby to choose eventually what gender it wants to be, but then it becomes about whether or not it's okay for the baby to be female at all, and there's so it's against the patriarchy that the political left is constantly talking about and saying it opposes, but in this case the patriarchy is also a culture with its own customs that need to be respected, and this is just a part of that. So they're right to not want the baby to be female, but they're clearly not supposed to be, because they're wrong to impose the gender issue on... Do you see the problem? I have no idea. I really, honest and truly, do not know what this episode was trying to say. It is just confusing. Was that the point? Was the point that it was confused, that it didn't know what to say because the issue is so muddied now, and somehow it's not knowing what to say, so it knows it's confused, or is confused by what it knows, or... Yeah, I don't know. All I know for certain is that I don't know. And that's enough to convince me that I am done with the Orville. If it knew what it was trying to say, if it actually made its message clear, if it delivered a clear, precise message about the topic, the topic that it clearly wanted to talk about, whatever that topic was, whether I agreed with it or not, I could still respect that it had its opinions, and it presented them, and did so in a surprisingly balanced way, for the most part. Not quite, but close. But it didn't know what it was trying to say. If the Orville was just a regular old sci-fi show that was escapism, and if it had a message, it was a pretty straightforward one, but mostly it was just there to entertain. I could probably get behind that and maybe learn to adjust to the whole Star Trek, but occasionally there's a puerile joke thing. But this episode showed that the Orville wants to make statements, but has no clue how. It wants to be Star Trek because Star Trek made statements. It wants to be Star Trek, but has no clue how to be Star Trek. It's got most of it down, but the really important part, it cannot get. And that's a problem. That is a problem that I am pretty sure might wind up plaguing the show later. If it's happening this early with some issue that it was trying to discuss, whichever one it was trying to be, whether it was transgender or feminism or whatever, if it's happening with that stuff, it's going to happen with other stuff too. And I'm out. I'm sorry. I'm out. Maybe you guys like the Orville. I don't know what other people are saying about it, but I know what I've seen. And quite frankly, this is one science fiction series that I wouldn't care if Fox canceled. So, yeah. It's a shame that so much effort has been put into a show that is so confused about how to deliver a message. So, yeah, I just had to fill you guys in, because if you haven't checked out the Orville yet, by the time you get to episode 3, if you do check it out, that will be the make or break point, I think, for the entire audience. This will be the point where people will either decide they're going to stick with it or not. I'm not sticking with it, and I'm not going back to it. I don't care what other people are going to say, because this was enough. I was on the fence with the first 2 episodes. This episode knocked me to one side. If you know what this episode was about, then please tell me. Try to explain it. I'd almost love to see someone try to explain it, because I don't want to drive myself crazy. Someone must know what it was about. But then again, even the episode didn't know what it was about. So if the person who's speaking doesn't know what they're saying, how is anyone else going to know? And how can we know that that person's got it right? Anyway, just wanted to share that with you all. If this was a rambling mess, don't blame me, blame the Orville. Well, that's all for now. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer, signing off.